So in this first panel, we're going to explore this notion of how North Carolina builds upon the assets. We've done some pretty great things, certainly lots to celebrate in the last 30 years, but we do, as Don has said, have work ahead of us. We won't be taking questions for the panel, but I will be asking questions of you during this session, so I invite you to have your devices ready for that. So here to moderate this first panel is someone who brings a unique perspective as a newly minted North Carolinian. This past month, he assumed leadership of the new Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, the organization charged with recruiting new businesses to the state, growing those already here, as well as promoting exports and tourism. He brings with him over 15 years of experience as an economic developer in Missouri and Ohio. Welcome to North Carolina. Y'all, let's give a warm Tar Heel welcome to Christopher Chan.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Anita. Pleasure to be here this morning. As Anita mentioned, I am relatively new to this state, so looking forward to learning a great deal of insights from the wonderful panel that's assembled here this morning. And happy 30th birthday to the Emerging Issues Forum. I hear 30 is the new 20, so hopefully that gives plenty of runway for opportunity for this organization. So as I said, being so new to North Carolina, this is a very timely forum for me. Looking forward to hearing a lot about the past successes that North Carolina has enjoyed in the innovation space, as well as what it's going to take moving into the future so that we can build upon all the great work that's been put in place over the past several decades. Look forward to learning also how our organization can help other companies create the kind of jobs that the companies represented up here on stage have helped create right here in the Old North State. And so again, thank you very much, Anita, for inviting me to join everyone this morning. This panel will consider innovation and competition in North Carolina over the past 30 years and examine how businesses are preparing for the changes to come. We'll begin with a look back at how North Carolina got to where it is today in its innovation ecosystem. We'll do a little bit of audience engagement, and then we'll ask every one of our panelists to give us a little bit of a quick look at the future. So we'll try to get ourselves back on time here, wonderful insights here, and we'll have a great discussion. A lot of these names up here probably don't require an introduction with this group, but since I'm the new guy in the room, I hope you'll indulge me the chance to introduce everyone real quickly. So starting from the very far end to your right, Steve O'Donnell is the Executive Vice President and Chief Racing Development Officer for NASCAR. Over the past 65 years, NASCAR has evolved from a primarily southeastern sport into now what's a multi-billion-dollar industry and a global brand. More than 90% of NASCAR's teams call North Carolina home, and as an economic development, what I love is the fact that according to UNC Charlotte, this industry contributes $6 billion annually to our state's economy and supports more than 25,000 jobs in this state. Among many things in his work, Steve oversees all operations at NASCAR's research and development facility in Concord, just up the road from Charlotte. So welcome. Good morning, Steve. To Steve's right, to your left, Bob Ingram has been a general partner at Hatteras Venture Partners since 2007 after spending a number of years in the pharmaceutical sector. Bob is not a Tar Heel by birth, but I understand he got here as quickly as he could. Bob helped create what is now GlaxoSmithKline through a series of mergers and acquisitions over the past 25 years, and during this time has garnered many awards for his leadership and really has become a lodestar in the state's very bright constellation of business leaders. A dedicated public servant, Bob continues to serve on the boards of many organizations today, including the Institute for Emerging Issues. Bob, very good to have you here this morning. Our next panelist is an NC State engineering graduate. Sepi Saidi grew up in Raleigh, and after 16 years in the transportation engineering field, founded her own company of, I think, 3 employees to start, Sepi Engineering in 2001, during what was a very difficult time nationally for our economy. Since then, Sepi has grown her company to appear multiple times on the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing U.S. companies, and just this past year, ranked 25th on the Zweig White Hot Firm list that recognizes the 100 fastest growing architecture, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting firms in the U.S. and Canada. For all of this success, Sepi has been featured in national publications such as Entrepreneur Magazine and received an ever-growing number of awards. Sepi is also on the board of the Institute for Emerging Issues. Good morning and welcome, Sepi. Last but certainly not least is Dr. Jim Goodnight. Many of you already know Dr. Goodnight's impressive story. He moved from a professorship at NC State to found his own company, SAS, in 1976. Since then, SAS has grown from a small North Carolina-based statistical software company to a global leader in data analytics with several billion in annual revenue. The company has over 13,000 employees around the world, including more than 5,000 at its global headquarters right here in North Carolina. SAS regularly appears on national best places to work lists, and Jim himself has received numerous awards and honorary degrees, including being named one of America's 25 most fascinating entrepreneurs by Inc. magazine and a great American business leader by Harvard Business School. Please welcome Jim to the panel as well. Good morning, Jim. And by the way, these are two NC State grads, so if you want to give a little Wolfpack cheer for the rest of the crowd, that'll probably get everyone in the good mood. So, we want to start off by looking back, and I'll be asking our panelists to take us through their experiences in building up their companies and their innovation right here in North Carolina, and ask them what it was about North Carolina that contributed most to the success that each of you have accomplished in your respective industries. So, Dr. Goodnight, you've been in business in North Carolina the longest. First off, tell the audience what is it about North Carolina, and especially the Triangle region, that has helped your company to innovate and grow like it has over the past 40 years?
Well, the Triangle is certainly a very attractive place to live and work. We've got good housing, good schools, some great universities. We have lots of cultural activities, things to do. We have college sports. We have professional baseball, professional hockey. We have numerous museums, lots of performing arts, concerts, Broadway shows that show up over at DPAC, and these are the type of cultural activities that the young, innovative, creative people are most interested in. As a matter of fact, about 10 years ago, Richard Florida wrote a book called The Creative Class, and there he pointed out that the types of amenities that we have in this area are exactly the type that the creative culture is interested in. So we find it a great place to live and work. It's easy to attract people, and once they're here, it's a great and easy place to be able to retain them. So we have that mass of innovative, creative people here already, and that itself makes it even more desirable to be here. I guess here in North Carolina, we've got one other place. Charlotte is in a similar situation. But a lot of other places, you're not going to have this massive innovative people there because of the lack of cultural facilities.
Right. So critical mass of talent and cultural amenities. Just curious, Bob, if you could follow up on Jim's remarks. Was it these things or maybe some others that brought you to North Carolina and that really helped accelerate that development of the pharma industry here?
Well, Chris, I'd echo what Jim said. I came here in 1990 from Merck. And Merck, like at that point, 90% of the pharmaceutical industry was headquartered in the Northeast, primarily New Jersey. And the first major company that came to North Carolina would have been Burroughs Wellcome, which later became part of what is now GlaxoSmithKline. And I think what attracted pharmaceutical companies to North Carolina, and Jim touched on it, were the universities. In fact, Glaxo started, some of you may recall, by renting space in the chemistry labs in Chapel Hill. And what brought then Glaxo to build its campus here, and I learned this joining the company 8 years after they came, was the fact that you had two great medical schools, a great school of veterinary medicine, an outstanding school of engineering here at NC State, all of which would produce talent. And it was that talent that attracted that investment. But as Jim just said, today it's a different game. No longer is it about building big campuses yourself. It's about collaboration. And collaboration not only with universities, but with young startups. And I think today the cultural menu that Jim just highlighted is an enormous advantage for North Carolina and particularly for the Triangle in attracting that kind of talent that leads to increased innovation.
Thank you, Bob. So Steve, what is it about North Carolina that makes our state such a center for what is now a very global industry called NASCAR?
Yeah, I think if you go back, with NASCAR's history, really back to the 40s, some of the tracks started out here in North Carolina. What was great for that was then some of the race teams felt like from a travel perspective, this would be a great base for them. But as you expand that to where we are today, surely there's tracks in Charlotte, which we all know, Bowman Gray, some of the stadiums around here are great for the fans, but it's now become really a cultural shift within NASCAR where, a crew chief used to be a mechanic who could just work on the car. Now when you look at NASCAR at our top series, Danica Patrick, Ryan Newman, Casey Kane, all three crew chiefs are NC State graduates. That is huge for the sport, and that culture has completely changed where it's focused on engineering. The culture here that you see in Raleigh, I think it's neat. You mentioned Charlotte and the Triad area. I think we kind of play in between all of those and can pull from all the universities in the area. So for us, it's been great for talent recruitment. It's been great for NASCAR as a whole. We've got the Hall of Fame here. We've got our office in Concord, our office in Charlotte. And then when you look at some of the innovation, people are attracted to that. Ford has just created a new innovation center located next to our R&D center. Toyota's done the same. A lot of parts manufacturers now feel the need to be here. And that's really helped us not only to be in close proximity, but that open workshop that I think we all talk about in innovation is huge for the sport, and we're seeing that in this area.
Right. Wonderful. So Sepi, speaking of engineering, what is it about our state specifically that's helped you drive innovation to become a leader within your industry?
Well, Chris, I do want to agree with what Dr. Goodnight said about culture. It's huge. Culture is really important, as well as Bob Ingram's comment about education. That our asset is our talent. So we need to be able to attract this talent, and culture plays a big role. And the universities play a big role. For me personally, the support of small businesses in this state, support of diversity in this state is really important. I started my company in 2001. In 2010, Time magazine called the previous decade a decade from hell. So to be able to start a company and grow the company in that decade was, for me, opportunities. The state afforded opportunities for a company like me that had started in being focused on transportation. The transportation funding was lacking, and then I found myself suddenly in this place of change or die. We had to completely redo the company and create a very diverse client sector. In North Carolina, what was amazing and still is amazing is that we have military bases. We have great universities. We had passed a bond for school bond project. We have great utility companies. We have solar industry. So I started thinking about how can we change to completely go from that market sector into a very different sector where allows us to grow and flourish. And all of those sectors that I talked about is where we currently work in. We do much more than we did before. We added many, many different service lines, from environmental to site civil, serving private sector. That was a really big deal. So the growth of state helped fuel the growth of my business. And also I have to give credit to the innovative way of delivering transportation projects. When North Carolina started supporting design build projects and also funding toll road, the Western Wake Expressway, which is the first toll road in North Carolina, played an important role in my business. We were a big part of the design of that project. It was a multi-year project. Again, being a small growing firm, that created a lot of sustainability for us to be able to just maintain and grow and grow. And I always say that 35 years ago, my parents chose to send their children to North Carolina because of higher education. I stayed because of opportunities. And I think that's our task going forward. We need to make sure we create that opportunity.
Thank Thank you. Wonderful. So successful business leaders like the folks on this panel, you're probably always asking yourselves, what could I have done even better to create even more success? Just putting that question in that context, what could North Carolina have done better over the past 30 to 40 years? Obviously, it is seen by many as a successful place for innovation, but just very curious from our panelists, and maybe starting with you, Bob, what are some of the things that perhaps North Carolina could have capitalized on even more so to project its success?
Well, I think we want to make sure that we don't forget, Chris, what has made us successful. And Sepi has touched on it, Steve's touched on it, certainly Jim. And that's the investment in education. Not only at the university level, but obviously starting at the elementary and secondary level. And particularly, in my opinion, in STEM education, given today's environment. But I think it's also, and I can speak obviously more from a life science perspective, we've had some great success in startup companies becoming big companies here, with SAS, in my opinion, being the best example. But we've also had Cree, which started out of NC State. I serve on the board. We've had Quintiles, global leader in services for pharmaceuticals. We've had LabCorp right in Burlington. But when you compare us to the other two centers in life science today, Boston and San Francisco, we haven't had as many big companies grow and stay. And in life science, folks, you need three things. You need talent, you need time, and you need capital. We have talent. We've all touched on that. Time is universal. What we haven't had as much as those other two centers is long-term patient capital. One quick example. Triangle Pharmaceuticals started here. Started out of University Science, started with Dave Barry from Burroughs Wellcome. It was growing like all startup companies, fits and spurts. But the capital that it invested in it was West Coast capital. And they took it to the West Coast. Today, it is the nucleus of what is Gilead, $60 billion market cap. They had more patient long-term capital. We need more of that here.
Other thoughts from our panelists? Access to capital seems to be one of those issues that this state needs to address to foster more innovation. Just curious if the other three have comments on that.
I would say access to capital is very important, and funding, in my opinion, funding infrastructure is very important, because we are currently in a place where we can't look to the federal government to fund infrastructure. The state is growing. It's imperative for economic development to have great roads to maintain and support the existing ones that are failing, hopefully not immediately, but it's really important to find innovative ways to do this over long term, to have a sustainable source of funding to take care of our infrastructure.
Absolutely.
What Bob said about education, and I think when you look at this, everyone talks STEM right now, but no state really owns it. There's a lot of people, what is STEM? How does that work? So I know from a NASCAR perspective, if you look at the state of North Carolina, you know, you in essence, that's your home team. You own NASCAR. I mean, other states wish they had race teams. We have some of the best engineers now in the world, attracting them from F1, from all the universities. So there is a huge opportunity, I believe, for North Carolina to own STEM and for future engineers to not just want to come to an NC State or North Carolina, but want to come to a junior high or a high school here, and parents wanting to move their children to the state. So I think it's a really big opportunity for the state going forward.
Thank you, Steve. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Goodnight?
Oh, I certainly agree on the STEM. We as a country, are not producing enough STEM graduates. We're going to need about 1 million more a year in the coming years. The state needs to find ways to maybe give differentiated pay to our STEM teachers so that we can attract and retain our STEM teachers. It's so easy for them to just walk away and go out into industry and get a much better paying job. So we need to do some work there. But we need about 10% more STEM students graduating from college than we have. Everybody can't be in STEM. We don't need everybody in STEM, but we do need about 10% more of the college graduates to be in the STEM areas. or at least the ones that are going to college. You know, right now we have 30 or 40% of the students that enroll in STEM drop out and move to some other degree because they found that STEM is just too hard. They're not prepared. So we've got to do a lot better job preparing students in the high school and junior high.
I want to take that opportunity and say that we need more women in STEM. We do not have enough women in that field. It's really important. We have to do something.
Absolutely. That diversity in the workforce that you
Absolutely.
spoke to earlier. So shifting gears a little bit, this is now the time for the audience to get a little bit engaged here with our panelists. Basically make this a look back to a look into the future of what's ahead for North Carolina across a variety of technologies and sectors. So to do that, we're going to put a series of quotes up here that speak to predictions about innovation and its key drivers moving forward. Again, let's get the audience, those of you who are here today, as well as I think the number of folks who are participating online to get involved. So first off, Anita is going to ask the audience some questions. While she does that, I'd like each of you to select, as the panelist, one of those questions or predictions and ask you to tell me if you, as a panelist, agree with it or not. The audience will use links that are found in their app for this session of the agenda to register your level of agreement with the different predictions that are shown up here on screen. So at the end of the remarks, we'll basically take a look at what the panelists think about this subject and compare that to the wisdom of the crowd, if you will, coming from the audience. So no pressure there at all, panelists. So Anita, I think you're going to lead us through this portion of the exercise.
Well, thank you, Chris. I actually want to be sure that the panelists feel a lot of pressure. If you will, pull out your devices for me and go to the portion of the agenda that is Innovation in NC, Then, Now, and Next. If you'll please select the Participate in Live Poll button, then I will read some predictions from venture capitalists. You've heard a lot about needing to have more capital available in North Carolina. We tried to scour some really thoughtful VC reps to get their ideas on where things were going, and now we want to know whether you agree with them or not, and then we'll see whether the panelists agree with you or agree with them. We will not show your polling results because we don't want our panelists to cheat. So after they give their answer, then we'll see whether they are consistent with the wisdom of the crowd. All right, our first prediction comes from Tony Chang of the Q-Ball Group. And he says, real-time and mobile services have empowered a new segment of workforce that thrives on flexible and independent work. This has enabled those who aren't able to or simply don't want to fulfill 9-to-5 jobs to enter the workforce and creates a prevalence of non-traditional careers in services. In 2014, in the US alone, there are 18 million independent workers. Tony tells us, expect that number to increase at a sharp rate in 2015. Your options, do you agree, strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? Okay, our next prediction comes from Catherine Barr with MDV. She says, until a decade ago, machine learning and artificial intelligence were relegated to research labs, technical publications, and big budget science fiction films. Now, ML and AI have crossed the chasm and will have a profound impact on the way all businesses work. Pairing human workers with machine learning and automation will transform knowledge work and unleash new levels of human productivity and creativity. Without the advances in automation, the swelling volume of data would overwhelm knowledge workers and cripple businesses. Again, strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree are the options. Okay, 3 more for you. Again, from Tony Chan. The U.S. government will empower and create even more entrepreneurs. More lenient immigration policies will allow people to pursue entrepreneurship, while affordable individual health care makes traditional employment less of a draw. These policy changes will drive a massive influx of entrepreneurs in 2015 and beyond. Right, Sergio Monsalve speaks to an issue we heard from Don Tapscott earlier this morning. Online education will graduate to higher valuations. Online is at a true inflection point, and it will accelerate. According to global industry analysts, online education in 2015 will reach $107 billion, which will represent a doubling in just 3 years. And finally, an issue we will delve into later this afternoon, cybersecurity. Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures says cybersecurity budgets will explode in 2015 as every company, institution, and government attempts to avoid being Sony'd. That's what you want, is to become a verb. VCs will pour money into this sector in the same way they poured money into the rental economy. Okay, Chris, back to you.
Okay, so as I said earlier, we'll be asking each of our panelists for their thoughts on one of these 5 topics that was put in front of the audience, and then checking that against what the audience's reactions were. So let's start off with you, Sepi. Which statement would you like to talk about of the 5 that came up there? We had obviously a variety of different topics.
I'm going to pick the U.S. government will empower, create more entrepreneurs. Okay. Can I agree and disagree?
You're up on the panel. You can do whatever you want, I think.
I agree that the more lenient immigration policies are important and are going to be very beneficial to the future of U.S. There are a lot of talent out there in the other countries, a lot of great ideas, which could benefit us greatly. But they are not able to, these individuals are not able to flourish and do all they can do, whether the government doesn't have as much of a free enterprise system and the democracy, or the capital is not there. And we have benefited in the past from very good, strong immigrants in the United States. We could benefit even more. So I see that could be a positive thing, especially as we graduate, great talent, PhDs and such. And we are not providing an easy path for them to be able to stay in the United States after they graduate. So they have to go back to the countries that they grew up in. And I do believe that the affordable health care could provide a lot of opportunities for folks who do not want to have traditional employment. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2015. That's the point. I hope it happens, but I agree in generally that the concept could be very beneficial.
Great, thank you, Sepi. And I guess we'll put up on screen what the audience thought.
We shall do that, and apparently, Sepi, most people were with you, other than 8% of the audience who said they don't know. We essentially have a bell curve. So it seems to me that either they were giving you a cue from the audience, or you were looking into your crystal ball, and it worked out really well for you.
Great, thanks, Anita. Steve, maybe let's move on to you. You get the next pick of one of these subjects.
Yeah, I'd probably talk about, I guess, machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think that somewhat relates to NASCAR, and I think if you look at NASCAR as a whole and where the sport is going, and it really dovetails with most technology companies now. It used to be, if you simply pointed to a race car, a crew chief talking to a driver, what do you feel? And then changes were made in that car. And now there is so much data that goes into what happens in the car, track scanning, simulation devices, 7-post shaker rigs that cost millions of dollars that are in race shops. all of those tools are vitally important for a team to compete at the highest level. However, you still got to have a human to interpret that data and then make a decision. So I would agree, close to strongly agree with the statement made. The reason why I wouldn't go fully strongly agree is I think when you look at our business, it's still a transition. There is so much data, and you have to have the right people to interpret that and make the right decisions. It's very easy to have the wrong people looking at certain data and trying to chase something that's not there. So from our perspective, data across the board about fan engagement. We work with HP in Charlotte, getting every piece of data from a race, the media, social media, Facebook, whatever it may be, with immediate input, what the fans feel about our race, and we've got to interpret that and go out and really drive a lot of the decisions that we make from a marketing and communications perspective all through that data we receive. So more and more that's going to become vitally important, especially for our industry, and for us to succeed and grow, especially with a younger demographic, and be more diverse. We've got to interpret data, we've got to be faster, but we've got to do it in the right fashion.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Anita, let's see what the audience thought.
All right, well, there's something amiss here because Steve also hedged his bets between strongly agree and agree, which means that technically I think you're in agreement with 84% of the audience.
I cheated earlier.
Okay. Bob, why don't we ask for your thoughts next on one of these subjects?
Well, maybe I'll comment, Chris, on the first point about the real-time and mobile services empowering a new segment that thrives on flexibility. First of all, I have the privilege among many to chair the Research Triangle Foundation Board, and as you know, we're building a new plan for the park. And I must say, as I drive along I-40 between 7, 8 in the morning, going one way, or coming back between 5 and 6 at night, there's still a lot of inflexibility. We got a lot of folks on the road. But I think that is a trend that we're going to see continue. I think it's great because it enriches your workforce. To Sepi's point about diversity, it allows people, because of that mobility, to participate who otherwise might not be able to participate as much, and I think that's healthy. I do think it's important, though, to have a collaboration. And what I don't see is, I don't see enormous numbers just sitting alone at home. I see them doing part of their work mobily, but in many cases coming together as teams, whether it be a small team or a more and more a flexible team. And it may be people who are colleagues within an organization or collaborating with colleagues outside their organization to arrive at a better answer and often initiate disruptive technology. I think also, one last comment, we say we live in a global society, and we do. We compete in a global society. And the fact that China, just to pick one market, is 14 hours difference from us in time. We can, I think, flexibility of work time, flexibility of work schedule, allows you to do things here, hand it off overnight to someone across the globe, let them work on it while you sleep, and you come back and you capture the full benefit of their efforts. So I think this is a trend that will continue.
Makes sense. So sounds like a sense of strong agreement here, but let's see what the audience thinks. Anita.
Thanks, Bob. We had 35% of the audience strongly agreeing and 57% agreeing.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Anita. So, Dr. Goodnight, I guess that leaves just 2 topics here for you to choose from in terms of providing your thoughts on.
Well, I would say that cybersecurity budgets are going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars this year. It's a huge concern, the vulnerability of our computer systems. You know, it took Target almost a year to get over their breach, and then the breach at Sony, and just last week, Anthem Healthcare had 80 million records stolen. You know, why they weren't fully encrypted, I don't know, but it's just the healthcare have been given a whole lot of money to put everything digital, and nobody told them they need to always encrypt this stuff very strongly. So that's too bad. But most cybersecurity software right now is the idea of building firewalls to keep the bad guys out. Or if they occasionally get in, we've got malware that scans our systems and removes types of attacks that have occurred in the past. We don't really have a good system right now of totally monitoring every single transaction that occurs. And I must say that SAS is actually working on just that area, where we are looking at every single transaction that occurs, every IP address that talks to every other IP address on a real-time basis. We are hitting as much as 180,000 IP-to-IP connections per second. So it's a huge amount, it's a huge volume, and we're fortunate that we've got the event streaming software that allows us to handle that kind of volume. So we certainly are expecting lots of money to be spent this year on it. So.
All right, sounds good. Anita?
Well, in our audience, we certainly had some folks who disagreed, about 10% and 1% who strongly disagreed. But the vast majority of people in the audience, perhaps having watched the news media over just this weekend, and certainly being aware of what it means to be Sony'd, came in at 45% strongly agreeing and 42% agreeing. So that just leaves us with one question, Chris, and since the panelists have taken the other four, we'd like to hear what you have to say.
Sure, and I think there was the one on online education. Yep. Is that what's left?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you saw with Donald's presentation just now, talking about how the educational model is being challenged by all these online delivery methods, that's certainly, I think, a trend that probably will only continue as you see more of this physical infrastructure built out to make that happen. It reminded me, some of you may have seen it, Atlantic Magazine did a cover story maybe 3 or 4 months ago about the future of college, profiling something called Minerva University, or the Minerva Project. It's a very pioneering way of delivering education based out west, but it's basically going to tie together virtual campuses in a very small, customized learning setting where people will come having gotten their lecture-type content from massive online courses, and then coming prepared to discuss and build on that foundation of critical thinking. So to me, it's a trend that will only accelerate in years forward, so I would say I probably strongly agree with this notion of triple evaluation that's coming up.
Okay, I think you passed the test, and we'll let you into the state.
Good to know.
37% of the audience agree with you. They strongly agree. 45% agree. This is probably the one where we had the highest amount of disagreement, although not really high in absolute terms. 12% of the audience disagree on the prediction. All right, Chris, I'm turning things back to you.
Okay, thank you, Anita. So we've had a good chance to look at the past. We've had a chance to get our panelists' thoughts on some of the trends that are being looked at that affect innovation coming down the road. We're going to spend just sort of our last 15 minutes or so talking a bit more about the future of innovation, specifically as it relates to what's going on here in North Carolina. This past fall, the Institute for Emerging Issues conducted a number of focus groups around the state with representatives from some of our key industry sectors that make up our state's economy. 4 key themes emerged from these focus groups. First was putting customer needs front and center when it comes to innovation. Makes sense. The second was really this imperative to embrace open innovation based on collaboration across organizations and even occasionally among competitors, as you heard Bob refer to earlier. The third was this need for closer and more responsive relationships with higher education, so that industry-academic collaboration. And then lastly, the importance specifically of communities in terms of developing and strengthening place-based brands, creating those types of place-specific assets that innovators are seeking out, which I think you all heard from each of our panelists. So what I'm going to do is ask our panelists for their own predictions, and I'd like them to speak especially in the context of this last point, which is namely how North Carolina communities can continue to innovate or support the innovation of your companies and help grow the industries that you are all leading in right now. So what role can our state play with respect to that innovative process. So starting off with you, Dr. Goodnight, innovation driven by big data, or those of you who haven't heard this mentioned a million times now in the media in the past several years, huge amounts of data on customers or potential customers. Big data is probably one of the hottest trends right now that's shaping the business world. With SAS positioned as a provider of one of the most, or the most popular business analytics software, how do you see big data playing out, and how can more of our communities around North Carolina capitalize on this important trend?
Well, you know, we used to call it a whole lot of data, but the term big data was coined, so we have to use the word big data now instead. Gathering information about your customers or potential customers has been going on for many years. There's just a lot more of it now. This area is an area that we specialize in. It's called customer intelligence, and that's to be able to put together enough information so retailers or bankers can make the right offer to the right person at the right time using the correct media approach. We're seeing more and more advertising dollars being spent now digitally. Less than 10% of our annual advertising spend is still in magazines and paper. About over 90% is digital. That means that we've got to recognize a customer the instant they appear on a website, so we can serve up an offering to them. Or we've got to be able to communicate with them through chat rooms to find out more about what they want. But there are companies that specialize in huge collections of data. One of them is LexisNexis. They have data on everybody. Equifax, also Axiom down in Arkansas. But these companies specialize in collecting huge amounts of data. We've got a company out in California that keeps track of every time you use a loyalty card in a grocery store. They have almost every loyalty card customer in the world, then they keep track of everything they've ever bought. And they do that so they can serve up to you a set of advertisements or coupons on the back of your checkout tape. So if you shop at Harris Teeter and you see all these ads keep coming out, it's based on your past history plus what you bought that day. So these things have to be done very instantaneously. But in the old days, they would use methods of they need a certain demographic. They want, women aged 35 to 40, different demographic like that. Now we're using very sophisticated statistical models like logistic regression models to be able to forecast a probability that somebody would be interested in these particular offers. So it's gotten a lot more sophisticated, and we're doing a lot more modeling using big data now.
Thank you. Bob, we talked earlier about one of these themes emerging from these focus groups being open innovation or collaboration across and outside of organizations. You're making a lot of investments within the biotechnology sector. How often do you see this open innovation concept in the opportunities that cross your desk?
Chris, we see it more and more every day. The whole life science sector is undergoing, in my opinion, a real revolution in how we do R&D. Historically, big companies like a GSK did 90% of the research in-house. The R&D budget at GlaxoSmithKline today is $8 billion US. That's a lot of money. But that represents about that much of the science done in the world. So thankfully, big companies have changed. And no longer do they focus that all in-house. In fact, that percentage has probably shifted somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% in-house and 80% outside. And they go outside earlier and earlier. They go outside to universities, they go outside to startups. But more and more, they also share. Right here in North Carolina, thanks to SAS, we have a project called DataSphere, where almost all of the major pharmaceutical companies that do cancer research share in one site, hosted by SAS, all of their preclinical target data. And the result of that for all of you who have a loved one that is affected with cancer, and sadly in America, 1 out of 3 women will have cancer in their lifetime, 1 out of 2 men, if we live past the age of 70, will have it, is we'll find better targets, we'll find better molecules against those targets because we share. We don't just keep it to ourselves, we collaborate. And I do want to commend Jim and the SAS team for facilitating that. And then one of the other things is that the pharmaceutical companies today, the major ones, and including successful biotechs, Amgen, Genentech, now part of Roche, all have venture capital funds themselves. They have venture arms themselves. And what that is doing is, again, providing that so important early seed stage capital to these brave young scientists who, the key in life science, folks, is to fail early and fail fast and learn from it. But you need to have that courageous, patient, long-term capital after you get to a good point to keep that idea going. And I think what North Carolina, final comment, can do to your question, Chris, is to continue again to invest in education. At the STEM level, as Jim said, we don't need everybody there, but we need more. And secondly, to also be partners with an RTP as we transform the park from a home of big companies to a place, whether it be an RTP in Chatham County, in Charlotte, in the Triad, where you, as the government, provide needed infrastructure, sewers, roads, that make this a more attractive place to attract and retain those small companies, that some of which will become big companies.
Absolutely. So everyone here on this panel and a lot of people in this room, they've contributed to the success that North Carolina has had so far, but like any successful business, North Carolina can't just sit on its laurels and become complacent. We have to address that constant urgency of now, of what it will take for us to be successful well into the future. Sepi, let's start with you on that topic. Your company is now 14 years old, grew from very modest beginnings and become one of the fastest growing, most successful engineering businesses in the state and certainly within the country. You already have offices in Raleigh, Wilmington, and Charlotte. Whether you continue growing here in the state or whether you decide to expand your business outside of North Carolina, which I've obviously prefer the former, but recognize that you'll need to grow outside the state as well. What will you need from any of the communities that you're doing business in that will help you continue to be successful and innovative?
We're definitely having a lot of opportunities to grow in North Carolina. There is, in all of the offices, we still have many more folks that we can hire. Depending on the economy and how the economy grows, we can respond to it. So we're still very focused in North Carolina as far as growing and investing in North Carolina. I'm always looking for opportunities in other states. We do projects in the Southeast, so I'm interested in other opportunities, and we like to seize the opportunities as they come. What is really important to everybody's point, and Bob Ingram just mentioned, education. We need a talented workforce. That's our asset in our industries. So continuous improvement and investment in our higher ed and K through 12, it's going to be extremely important. I also want to emphasize that, again, the infrastructure is very important. The speaker this morning was talking about the cost of doing nothing could be higher than cost of change. So for right now, there is a real urgency with the funding of our transportation systems. And I'm going to put a plug in for North Carolina Chamber that has an initiative going currently that's called North Carolina Can't Afford to Wait. And it's a website that people can go in. They have created a coalition that is urging the legislators to proactively look for a sustainable funding source. And that's going to create a lot more economic development. It's going to create jobs. It's going to help the small businesses. So I think that's a big push that the communities can provide for us, and we can provide for the communities. And again, I just want to always emphasize diversity, diversity, diversity. It's important. It's going to make our state, this amazing state that we live in, even more competitive and great. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sepi. So Steve, you get the privilege of the final question on the panel. So I guess to use your industry's metaphor, you get to drive in under the checkered flag of this morning's discussion. Same question for you. NASCAR, it's now a global brand and has been for some time with more and more teams that are located outside North Carolina. We said earlier that 90% of NASCAR teams do call North Carolina home. But as the industry expands and as NASCAR grows, how do we ensure that this state remains a central point of innovation for your all's industry?
So I'd start off, excuse me, by echoing what Sepi said, diversity. And when you look at NASCAR, if our sport is going to grow, we've got to reflect what North America looks like more and more in the world for that matter. So graduates, students from all over the world looking at NASCAR in a different way, I think is huge for our sport. But I'd give you 4 facts about NASCAR that some folks may know and some may not in terms of where we see the sport going. So NASCAR is the #1 recycler green program in all of sports. Most people don't know that. They watch a race and say, oh my gosh, what's going on here? There are huge opportunities for folks to join in with NASCAR and continue to grow that program. When you look at safety, #1 in all of motorsports, working with Toyota with their Thumbs program, working with NASA, working with the Air Force. I can tell you when I get on the highway in any state, I wonder why there's not safer barriers. I wonder why I don't have a 7-point harness. Some of that may not be feasible, but why can't NASCAR work with the state and have North Carolina lead in all the safety initiatives and have that open innovation concept? And then the last 2 I would say is 2 really emerging things from NASCAR. We talked about kind of the man and machine or technology. We've gone to where we used to have 43 officials up and down pit road. We're now going to officiate via 43 high-definition cameras. Part of that is to make it safer, but it's also to deliver more data and ultimately put that in a fan's hands. That's just emerging. How do we do that? What's the right way to do that as we go forward? So, I think those areas, pit road, and then looking at how do you take any sort of technology, open innovation at our R&D center and be that proving ground? I mean, we have a lot of assets at NASCAR where we can pull together with, not necessarily just the universities, but local high schools. What can we do as a group to bring kids in? I didn't grow up on NASCAR. I'm sure most people here didn't have a car in their backyard. That's not normal. So the education part is evolving, and I think giving kids the opportunity not just to say, hey, become a race car driver, but become any part of the business. You can work in any company and be involved in the sport, and I think North Carolina could really partner, and I've got to talk to the folks at SAS to put a partnership together as well.
Sounds good. You want to sponsor a NASCAR car, Jim? You could.
We've looked at it. It's very expensive.
It's a good answer, good answer.
I'm sure you guys can work out a deal backstage here. Well, we are coming up on the end of what's hopefully been an illuminating discussion for all of you. I know as a relative newcomer to the region, I've found it very fascinating, just understanding how each of these leaders has grown their business successfully here in North Carolina, and some of the things that all of us in this room can be doing to ensure that this type of success and growth can come from all different industries and all types of companies in the years ahead. So again, I hope you'll join me in thanking Steve, Bob, Sepi, and Jim this morning for a wonderful discussion.